Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of... Before I get started, I would just like to give everyone some updates. As you may or may not know, last month I tested positive for COVID. However, since I was fully vaccinated and had my booster, I was able to avoid a hospital stay, and some of my more severe symptoms didn't last that long. But at the same time, I did stay in bed for a full 7 days simply because I didn't have any energy whatsoever. And towards the end of that week, I was called in some meds because everything was turning into pneumonia. Then after I recovered from that, I ended up keeping a deep cough and shortness of breath for the following week, which really limited me to the amount of time that I could talk or actually be active. Aside from that, my great aunt passed away last Monday. Then we celebrated my grandma's 87th birthday last Tuesday. Then we laid my great aunt to rest last Saturday, which was actually the anniversary of my grandfather's death. So, obviously, January was very exhausting and emotional. And for some weird reason, everything made me sit back and think about a few books I had read that made me cry. Now, I'll admit, I'm not ashamed to cry or be in touch with emotions that others might perceive as being weak. But with that said, it actually takes a lot for me to cry, especially when it comes down to entertainment. But when the waterworks do turn on, I always feel like I've had a burden lifted from me and like I've had this really good emotional purge. So, anywho, now that everyone is caught up to date and we understand that crying can be healthy, here are a few books that made me ugly cry into the sleeve of my flannel. First up is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. And this book takes place in the 1980s, where it introduces Abby and Gretchen, who have been best friends since 4th grade. But after one Labor Day weekend during their high school years, their friendship is put to the test when Gretchen becomes possessed by a demon. Y'all, no joke. This book didn't just hit me in the feels once, but it did it twice. Like, the first time I reached for Kleenex was when Abby took control of the exorcism. Then I needed even more tissues when I arrived at the inn and received the summary of what happened between Abby and Gretchen. But instead of crying out of sadness or depression, I was really crying because this book shows how powerful a friendship can be. And because of how relatable that was, it was nothing but tears of joy. Next up is Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright. Now, this book introduces two serial killers by the name of Andrew and Jay, who are not only cannibals, but they're also necrophiles. And after they meet in a bar where they become lovers, they set their sights on a boy named Tran. Yet, even though they plan for Tran to be their next target, Tran's ex-boyfriend starts to suspect something's wrong, and he comes to the realization that it's up to him to save the day. Over the years, I had heard this was a fairly extreme book, and a lot of people looked down on it because of how the serial killers were portrayed with a vampiric romance. So going into this, I honestly did not expect for it to tap into my emotions the way that it did. And unlike the previous book on this list where I cried because it made me feel good, Exquisite Corpse made me cry because at the end it was painfully human. Which I really can't go into detail because of spoilers, but I will say that Tran's thought process was like a knife in my heart. Last is The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury. And aside from this taking place on Halloween, it focuses on a group of children who are upset because their friend Pipkin is too sick to go trick-or-treating. But despite them being bummed out, they end up going to a local haunted house where Pipkin is supposed to catch up with them. Once there, they get confronted by this creepy old man by the name of Moundshroud, and as they're talking to him, they discover that Pipkin has actually passed away and his soul has been carried off to the other side. From here, the friends and Moundshroud band together and cross through space and time to retrieve Pipkin. So, I reviewed this book about 2 Halloweens ago, and even though I grew up familiar with the story, I did not cry over this until 2020, which I think the main reason why is because that fall I had a lot of death that surrounded me. So, after I finished reading this and reviewing it, life went on as normal. But after I sat back and started thinking about the fantasy elements and how those were used to save the life of a loved one, I ended up associating that with my own reality, and I had no other choice but to ugly cry. Those are 3 books that made me cry. However, I would like to add some honorable mentions, which my top 3 honorable mentions would include The Good House by Tananarive Due, The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix, and Nosferatu by Joe Hill. Now, the reason why I say these are honorable mentions is because even though they did bring me to the edge of almost crying, I didn't actually cry. So, yeah, for that reason, totally honorable mentions for choking me up. Before I close out, I would like to ask, what are some horror books that choked you up or made you cry? Load up the comments. Also, I would like to use this opportunity to thank my Patreon contributors. Here's a list of my Patreon contributors, and as you can tell, some of them are creators, so be sure to check them out. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon as well, I have a link available in the description section of this episode. And for $5 a month, I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos like what you see here. And for $10 a month, I'll still give you that shout out, but at the beginning of every month, I'll send you over one of my creepy photos because I do creepy photography on the side. Once you receive that image, you can print it off and do whatever you like. So if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can have a good time together. Also, if you would like to hunt me down on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are all available in the description section of this episode. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I do have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week and sweet nightmares.